Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a really pivotal moment in UFO history. The alleged sighting by Socorro, New Mexico police officer Lonnie Zamora back on April 24th, 1964. He wanted to get a real handle on this one, and, well, it's a story packed with some fascinating twists and turns.
Absolutely. The Zamora incident, it isn't just, another blurry photo or a fleeting nighttime glimpse. This involves a law enforcement professional, happened in broad daylight, and there was even physical evidence reported at the scene.
Right.
So our goal today is really to unpack the core story, dig into what was reported as evidence, and kind of explore the wide range of ways this event has been interpreted over the years. We'll be drawing on the Wikipedia entry for this incident, which, gives us a pretty solid overview of the key details and the different perspectives.
Okay. Let's start right at the beginning then. April 24th, 1964, around, 5:45 p.m.? What sets this whole thing in motion?
Well, it begins with a pretty ordinary situation, actually. Lonnie Zamora, who was a sergeant with the Socorro Police Department, he was on duty and pursuing a speeding car south of town.
Mm-hmm.
He put out a radio call to the dispatcher, Nep Lopez, mentioning a possible motor vehicle accident and saying he'd be, quote, checking the car down in the arroyo.
So, a routine call,
Mm.
potential traffic incident, but then the narrative shifts pretty dramatically,
It
right?
does, yeah. Not long after that initial call, Zamora radios in again, this time asking Lopez to look out the window, see if he could spot something in his direction.
Okay.
When Lopez asked for more info, Zamora's first description was that it looks like a balloon. He also requested that State Police Sergeant Chavez meet him at his location.
A balloon? Huh? That's surprisingly mundane, I guess, given what follows. When Sergeant Chavez arrived, what did they find?
Well, when Sergeant Chavez got there, his first question to Zamora was, naturally, what's the trouble? Zamora then pointed him towards some brush that was burning in the area.
Burning brush.
Yeah, and later, other officers who arrived also noted patches of smoldering grass and brush. This detail, the burning vegetation, it becomes quite significant when we start looking at the various attempts to explain what Zamora saw.
Right, okay, so we have this initial setup. Routine traffic stop, interrupted by something weird. Zamora calls for backup, and then they find this scorched ground. Now let's get into the heart of it, Zamora's actual account. What did he report seeing?
Zamora told investigators that while he was still pursuing the speeder, he heard a roar and saw a flame in the sky to southwest, some distance away, possibly a 12-mile or a mile.
A roar and a flame.
His initial thought was that it could have been an explosion at a nearby dynamite shack. That's actually what made him decide to break off the car chase and go investigate.
A dynamite shack explosion. Yeah, that would definitely be something worth checking out. So he heads towards the sound and the flame, and that's when his perception, and it takes a radical turn.
Exactly. Zamora said that as he got closer, driving up this rough hill, he observed a shiny object to the south, somewhere between 150 and 200 yards away. At first, he thought it was just an overturned white car,
Yeah.
up on radiator or on trunk.
An overturned car. Okay, again, a seemingly normal explanation in the initial moments, but the description of this object, it evolves quite a bit, doesn't it?
It does indeed. As he got nearer, he realized it was definitely not a car. He described the object as being like aluminum. It was whitish against the mesa background, but not chrome,
Mm-hmm.
and quite unusually shaped like the letter O.
The letter O, that's not your classic flying saucer shape, is it? What else did you report observing?
He also claimed to have had a brief look at two figures who were near the object. He described them as wearing white overalls.
White overalls.
Yeah, and being normal in shape, but possibly they were small adults or large kids.
Yeah.
This detail, the occupants, it's one of the most talked about aspects of the case.
Absolutely. Two figures in white suits next to this O-shaped object. It definitely paints a picture that goes way beyond, misidentifying a plane or something. And then according to Zamora, the event took another bizarre turn.
That's right. He reported hearing another loud roar, louder than the first, and seeing a blue and orange flame shoot out from underneath the object.
Blue and orange flame.
Following this, he said the object rose, seemed to hover a bit, and then moved away at a very high speed, very quickly and silently after the initial roar stopped. This ascent, with the fire and the sound. It's a crucial element of his account.
So we have a roaring, flaming object shaped like an O Two figures in white overalls reportedly nearby, and then it takes off. It's certainly a compelling and very unusual story. Unsurprisingly, this generated a significant amount of attention, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. Zamora's claims led to investigations to the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book, that was their official UFO investigation unit at the time,
Right, Blue Book.
as well as by numerous independent ufologists. It also got widespread coverage in the mainstream press. The fact that Project Blue Book ultimately classified the case as unknown, well, that only amplified the speculation and interest surrounding it.
Yeah.
And that unknown label, for many, wasn't necessarily an admission of, aliens, but more that they couldn't definitively disprove Zamora's account with the evidence they had, which is an important distinction in these kinds of investigations, I think.
Unknown from Project Blue Book. Yeah, that's a label that definitely adds to the mystique in UFO history. But, as with almost any such incident, there have been various attempts to provide more down-to-earth explanations. What are some of the conventional theories put forward?
Several have been proposed over the years. One of the earliest came from UFO skeptic Stuart Campbell. He suggested that what Zamora and potentially other witnesses saw and heard was almost certainly a mirage of the star Canopus.
A mirage of a star. That sounds like a pretty significant leap to explain a physical object. Landing gear impressions, burning brush, figures on the ground. How did Campbell account for those details if it was just a mirage?
Well, that's one of the main points of contention with that theory,
Yeah.
It really struggles to explain the specifics of Zamora's description, especially the shape, the figures, the physical traces. It's quite a complex hallucination to attribute to a simple mirage.
Yeah, seems like a stretch.
Another suggestion that emerged was that Zamora might have inadvertently witnessed the testing of a lunar landing device, possibly by personnel from the nearby White Sands missile range.
Okay, the White Sands connection, that seems a bit more plausible, maybe. Considering the location and the time frame, the space race era, were there any known tests happening around that specific time that might align with Zamora's account?
While it's definitely a possibility, and people have looked into it, no concrete evidence has ever definitively linked a specific test at White Sands to Zamora's sighting. The timeline, the specifics of what he reported, they don't perfectly match any publicly known tests from that period. Then we have the more firmly skeptical viewpoints, like Robert Schieffer's suggestion that the whole thing was a hoax orchestrated by students at nearby New Mexico Tech.
A student prank.
Yeah.
What was the basis for that particular theory? Like, did they find any evidence?
Well, Schieffer and even Sterling Colgate, who was actually the president of New Mexico Tech at the time, they kind of leaned towards the idea of a relatively simple but effective hoax. Colgate famously suggested the object was just a candle in a balloon, not sophisticated.
Or candle in a balloon?
Yeah, that explanation attempts to account for the visual aspects, the light in the sky Zamora initially reported, maybe.
But a candle in a balloon versus a roaring, flaming object on the ground with landing gear marks and two figures, that's quite a difference in scale and detail, isn't it? Wouldn't a trained police officer like Zamora be able to distinguish a candle in a balloon from something more substantial, especially in daylight?
That's a very valid question, and it's a key point of contention for those who doubt the hoax theory. Zamora was a law enforcement officer, trained in observation, and the details he provided seemed quite specific, not what you might expect from misidentifying a balloon.
Right. And there were other skeptical theories, too, weren't there? Something about tourism.
Yes, Philip J. Klass, another prominent UFO skeptic, put forward a rather unusual theory. He suggested the entire event was a deliberate fabrication, like a conspiracy by the municipal government of Socorro, specifically to boost tourism in the area.
A municipal conspiracy to increase tourism. That's certainly a unique and maybe a bit cynical angle. What was the reasoning behind that idea?
Klass basically argued that the supposed sighting and the attention it would bring would attract visitors and stimulate the local economy. But, like the other skeptical theories we've discussed, there's never been any real hard evidence to support such a coordinated conspiracy.
Yeah, that seems unlikely. It feels more probable that any later tourism ideas were just a reaction to the existing interest in the event. Right?
Exactly. While it's a colorful theory, the idea of a deliberate, long-term conspiracy orchestrated by the local government decades in advance seems pretty far-fetched. It's much more probable that the local community's interest naturally led to discussions about potential tourism later on.
Okay.
So we have this wide spectrum, right? Misidentification, potential military tests, deliberate hoaxes, even a tourism conspiracy. It really highlights just how challenging it is to definitively explain these kinds of events when, well, irrefutable evidence is lacking.
Absolutely. So what happened in the years following Zamora's report? Did it have any lasting impact on the town of Socorro itself?
It definitely did. In 1966, just a couple of years after the alleged sighting, Paul Ridings, he was the president of the Socorro County's Chamber of Commerce back then, actually proposed developing the site, where Zamora claimed to have seen the object, as a way to attract tourists.
Turning a supposed UFO landing site into a tourist attraction sounds like something straight out of a movie. What actually came of that proposal? Did they build anything?
Well, they did. Stone walkways and steps were indeed constructed in the arroyo, leading down from the mesa top. They even built a rock walkway that circled the area believed to be the landing site and added some wooden benches for visitors.
Okay.
However, there was a rather interesting twist to this development.
A twist? What was that?
The construction didn't actually take place on the exact spot Zamora had reported. It was built about a quarter of a mile away.
Why?
Apparently, due to local rumors that the original location was contaminated by radioactivity from the object.
Radioactivity rumors. Wow. That's a fascinating detail. It really speaks to the level of belief and maybe even some fear that surrounded the event locally. So a tourist attraction based on a potentially radioactive, well, not quite landing site. The irony is certainly there.
Definitely. And the story continues even further down the line, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. In 2012, quite a few years later, Socorro City officials Ravi Bhaskar and Pat Salome commissioned a local artist to create a mural commemorating Zamora's alleged UFO sighting.
A mural. Okay.
Yeah, this mural was placed on a spillway facing Park Street, which kind of indicates that the event still holds a certain significance for the town, at least in the local memory, and perhaps identity.
So even decades later, the Lonnie Zamora incident remains a part of Socorro's local identity and history.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how these events can really take on a life of their own, become embedded in the cultural fabric of a place. And sadly, Lonnie Zamora himself is no longer with us to comment further.
That's right. Lonnie Zamora passed away on November 2, 2009, in Socorro. He was 76 years old. But his account, as we've discussed, well, it continues to be analyzed and debated within the ongoing discussion of UFO phenomena.
So as we bring this deep dive into the Lonnie Zamora incident to a close, we've covered a significant amount of ground. There's the initial police report that quickly evolved into this claim of witnessing a very unusual object in two figures.
Mm-hmm.
The various investigations, like Blue Book, that ultimately reached no definitive conclusion. And the wide spectrum of explanations offered everything from misidentification of stars to, elaborate hoaxes. It really highlights the inherent complexities in trying to understand these kinds of accounts.
Absolutely. The Zamora case serves as a really compelling example, doesn't it, of how a seemingly straightforward eyewitness report can lead to just a multitude of interpretations when concrete, verifiable evidence is absent. It underscores that enduring mystery around many UFO sightings and the ongoing tension between those seeking logical, conventional explanations and those who remain open to, well, other possibilities.
Which brings us to our final thought for you listening. Consider the power of eyewitness testimony, especially when it comes from someone in a position of public trust, like a police officer. But also reflect on how easily human perception can be influenced, by stress, expectation, various factors, and how in the absence of definitive proof, narratives can diverge so dramatically. They lead to everything from serious investigation to local legends and folklore.
Yeah, the Lonnie Zamora incident really remains a captivating case study in our persistent human fascination with the unexplained, doesn't it? What really happened out there in the New Mexico desert in 1964, we still don't know for sure.